Hello and welcome to Let's Review. Quite a long time ago, I looked at a game called Bound by Flame, a very promising RPG with quite a lot of problems as well. I also looked at a game called Mars Warlogs, which was created by the same company, Spiders, and that was also a promising RPG with quite a lot of problems. Spiders have now once again returned to Mars, this time for a game called the Technomancer, and with a story that runs roughly parallel to the one in the original Mars Warlogs, the question becomes, have Spiders learned from their mistakes and made a better game as a result? Well, to answer that, we start as we always do, with the gameplay. The Technomancer plays an awful lot like Spiders' other games in many important respects, starting with the return of an old friend, the crafting system.
This is the crafting system of the Technomancer, and as I said, it's instantly familiar to anyone who's played a Spiders game previously. So you have your weapons that break down into various categories. So, for example, this is my steel staff. This is a very high-level weapon. In fact, this is the most powerful weapon that I found in the game for the staves. And it's currently got level 4 damage upgrades on it across the entire board. So, for example, if I was to look at the shaft here, I could swap out that with level 3, level 3 crit, level 3 disruption, level 3 damage. Obviously, changing level 4 damage for level 3 damage would be a very foolish thing to do. But you can notice that it does change the appearance of the wraps here. But you will also notice that I've basically got choices between damage, disruption, and critical. And the stuff you need, that's my only options for it. And the stuff you need to actually get the level 4 is a rank 3 in crafting. You need the upgrade plans, and you'll need good quality metal and good quality leather, which are relatively rare to come by. Same goes for upgrading, if I actually hit the right button. If I scroll through here, I can, you can just about see its design changing there. But again, it's a little bit hidden, can be a little bit difficult to see sometimes. And again, it's not worth changing that. I can also change and upgrade the items that my support characters have. So, for example, Nisha is using Bulyakov's dagger. And I could now, for example, get the level 3 crit upgrade, which would change the appearance and obviously reduce the damage but increase the chance of crit. And since I don't have the upgrade plans for superior daggers, I can't get her the level 3 damage upgrade. And again, I can mess around with this as much as I want. But as a general rule of thumb, it's pretty much about finding the thing you want to do with it, which will usually mean things like that. This is the Great Master's Breastplate. Again, this is the best armor I found in the entire game. And you'll notice not a massive amount of options here for what I can do with it. I could have electrical reduction, but again, there is some reasonable customization in what it causes it to look like. And if I look at the back, you can get these swanky spine things that improve the quality of your fluid regeneration, which is effectively your mana pool. And fundamentally, that's it. There are other things you can craft, so you can craft explosive traps and health and mana injections if you want, but I've never felt the need to. You can pick up a reasonable number of those just from guys lying around, and you can break down stuff you don't want. So fundamentally, that's kind of it for the crafting system.
While I still like this crafting system, it's actually a little bit disappointing after the version in Bound by Flame. And the simple reason for that is that version had literally dozens of different upgrades, each of which made substantial changes to the appearance of the items. Here, you've got a lot fewer options. You've only got 4 tiers worth of upgrades and 3 variants for each of the weapons. And frankly, they don't customize the appearance enough to be really cool and interesting looking. The system still works pretty well, but I think there did need to be more variety in the appearance and a lot more variety in the items you could actually equip on your weapons. Rather than simply giving me the option to do additional damage, we could have, for example, bonus bleed damage or something like that. It's all personal choice, and there isn't a massive amount of it here. You pretty much got to go with straight damage upgrades. The same definitely applies to the armor, although less so because there is at least a better amount of image customization with that. It's a lot more obvious than it is on the weapons. While there's a lot less options in the customization, There are definitely more options in the combat, however, and a lot of that comes back to the changes in the leveling system.
The leveling system of the Technomancer is broken down into 3 categories. So we have our skills here, which are primarily combat focused, our talents, which primarily have applications outside of combat but can influence it in some ways, and our attributes. And our attributes are primarily related to what equipment we can equip. So if I look at the talents first, they're broken up into 4 trees. One for the warrior skill tree, which uses a staff in combat, one for the rogue, which uses a knife and a gun, and one for the guardian, which uses a shield and a mace. We also have this Technomancer tree, and the Technomancer tree is all about your Technomancy powers. It's all about throwing around lightning, it's all about defending yourself with lightning-based shields, for example. And you can also increase the damage of your weapon by applying an electrical upgrade to it as a passive buff. So this particular build is a fairly late level character. As you can see, I've spent 30 points and my next pointer will be at level 32, so I'm currently at level 31. Because you get a point in this tree every time you level up. For example, I'll be putting points heading up towards this tornado skill, which will increase my, which will give me the ability to use a special attack with my staff. But there's also options here for various other things around here, and again, each of these focuses on one particular weapon choice. The talents, on the other hand, as I said, are more passive. So you have Charisma up here, for example, which is all about persuading characters to do what you want them to do. And if you don't have the Charisma skill, good luck actually getting, Charisma checks passed, because most of the time you'll only have a 25% chance to succeed, which is, I've never actually seen one of those pass. You also have the Science skill, which can increase your health regeneration outside of combat, potentially inside of combat as well, if you rank it up high enough. And again, also has certain contextual actions. Now, you'll notice that I've got a bunch of these at various levels, and you'll also notice that I have certain things. So, because I have a good relationship with one of my allies, I'm getting a bonus point in crafting, which meant I didn't spend a point getting crafting level 3, because I'm getting that bonus point from being allied with her. Same goes for lockpick level 3, because I've got Nisha with me, and I've got a good relationship with her, I'm getting a +1 bonus to that. So I've got level 3 lockpicking without having to invest the additional point. I'm also gaining acceleration level 1 from these goggles that I'm wearing, so certain items can give you boosts to certain things. The only one I don't have at least 1 point in is the stealth tree, and you can use stealth in combat, but it's not terribly useful until you actually get it all the way up to rank 3, which allows you to actually knock people out with stealth attacks. Which, it's a lot of investment for a playstyle that I'm not particularly interested in. The attributes as well, and again, you'll notice that I'll get my next point for this at level 33, because you get those every 3 levels, I think it is, and attributes every 4. I think, but I can't remember for certain. And again, attributes are obviously worth getting, so I've currently got power level 5, which is all about your Technomancy stuff, and strength level 5, which is all about your kind of warrior attacks. And I've started putting points into constitution just to give me a bit more health, maybe a bit tougher, allow me to carry more stuff. And fundamentally, that's kind of it for the leveling system. It's also worth noting that the actual unlocked abilities, rather than the passive stuff like this, also has an additional buff. So, for example, the one I chose to get for my magnetic armor adds life regeneration to me while that armor is up, which is very useful to have in combat. And I increase the chance of a critical hit when using electric weapon. And fundamentally, that's kind of it for the leveling system.
I honestly quite like this leveling system. The 3 different categories work reasonably well to give you variations of where you want to put your points, and quite often you'll end up looking at a thing and just thinking, oh, I'm a couple more levels away and I can get that point and that'll be really useful. Which is a good way for a leveling system to work. You should always be keeping your eye on the next thing, looking for your next unlock. And this does do that. While you'll definitely end up picking one combat style early on and then sticking to it, adding the Technomancy tree as well does give you somewhere else to stick your points, and it's definitely worth putting a few in there, whatever your combat style of choice is, because it'll work with any of them. It's worth noting that a few of the non-combat skills are less useful than others. In particular, science feels a little underwhelming. You get it to level 1 for the sake of the health regeneration, but it's not worth leveling any further for the simple reason that the conversation options that use it are extremely rare. Charisma, on the other hand, turns up quite a lot and is definitely worth picking up, especially if you're like me and you like to talk your way out of situations. All of this stuff does naturally feed into the game's main combat system.
This is the main gameplay screen of the Technomancer, and I'll say at this point that this is a relatively late game save, so I've got a lot of powers, a lot of abilities to play with. You know, hence why my quick slot bar along the bottom is fairly full. I can bring up a mini-map of the area, so we're currently in an area called the Slums. This is an area that you will go back to an awful lot throughout the campaign, and I will obviously try and avoid any spoilers here. We have 3 main combat styles in this game, which I brought up earlier. So, this is the staff style, the dagger and gun style, and the mace and shield style. And I'm just going to focus by demonstrating with the staff style, for the simple reason that that's how I built this character. You will also notice he's got that, shimmering magnetic shield around him, which I'll just refresh. He's also using the Overload ability, which boosts all his electrical damage, and the Electrified Weapon ability, which boosts the damage from his weapon by adding electrical damage to it, which is very useful. So I'm just going to go and try and find some guys to beat up, just so I can demonstrate the combat. I think there should be some... Yes. There's some guys around here. Now, those guys won't actually attack me until I attack them, because I'm kind of neutral with them at the moment, but for demonstration purposes... Yep. At this point, I've got a significant advantage over them because I am quite powerful at this point. I mean, I can throw out attacks like that, which are pretty nifty. Do good damage, knock down the enemy, and that guy's down. Pretty much got this guy left to deal with. And just that last one over there. So I can lock on if I want to, but I don't think I'm going to need to because they're down. And again, this is quite late game, and the enemies do not scale in any way. So as I say, this is an area that you will be going back and forth through the entire game, and the enemies here are of consistent quality. To the best of my knowledge, they do not change at all throughout the game. So early on, these guys were actually a pretty tough, pretty difficult fight, and as you just saw, I just clobbered them down without even particularly trying or paying attention. Now, it's worth noting that you don't really kill anybody in this game. You'll kill creatures, but you don't kill people, unless you deliberately choose to do it. So, if you go over to a character, you can hit the Q button in order to drain them. This will get you some serum, which is what this planet uses as currency, but it will kill them, and you'll lose a point in karma for that, and some of your companions may object. So I tend not to do it, because, what can I say? I try not to be a dick. And honestly, that's actually a reasonably good display of the combat system. However, because, as I said, I'm quite overpowered at this point. There we go. There's some other guys I can beat up. The slowdown indicates a critical hit. And I should also be trying to dodge a lot more than I am. Again, because this is relatively late game, I can survive a lot that early on would have really screwed me over. So that guy tried to hit me, and I basically just dodged out the way. If I wanted to swap to the warrior stance, for example, I could. I can fight him a bit better there, and I can put up my defenses to guard against it. So the different styles do have different methods. This one's all about being fast and aggressive and focusing on lots of crit damage. The staff is very much an area control style, so you'll be fighting off groups of enemies at once. And the staff does combine particularly well with the Technomancy skill tree, I've found. Because it does allow you to create, to all intents and purposes, a battle mage build. I'm sure there's a guide on the Steam forums to how to create a quote-unquote battle mage, and that's exactly what it feels like.
Watch yourself.
So, there is a difference in how each style plays. You'll be doing less dodging with the shield and more blocking and guarding, whereas the other two are much more about staying out the enemy's way. But ultimately, that's actually kind of it for the combat. There is a reasonable amount of complexity based on how you want to upgrade your character, but the basics of the combat system don't change throughout.
For the most part, I like the gameplay here, though I will say that it does have a horribly steep learning curve. You will die a lot in the early levels until you really start to get used to it and start leveling your character up, because you are just badly outclassed by a lot of the enemies initially. Though that does mean that once you get further into the game and start getting a lot more powerful and start being able to wail on the enemies, it does feel like you've genuinely got a lot more powerful as the game goes on. So there is a certain sense of character progression there. With that said, it does mean that the early game can be quite frustrating, as you will die significantly, and it can feel a bit cheap. I understand why people have problems with this system, but honestly, it's better than it's ever been. And if Spiders can manage to nail out the last few kinks and give us a lot more of a smooth introduction at the beginning of their next game, this could be a really good system. Overall, I do genuinely like the gameplay, but it's not quite there yet. The story of the Technomancer is set on Mars, specifically a Mars that has been partially terraformed and colonized. The terraforming has resulted in a breathable Earth-like atmosphere, but not an atmosphere thick enough to actually protect people from the sun's radiation. As a result, anyone who goes out in direct sunlight has a bad habit of either dying or horribly mutating. This naturally makes it not a particularly pleasant planet to live, and as a result, technology has backslid very much. A lot of the initial technology from the early landings is considered to be on a par with magic by many. Into this world comes Zachariah Mancer, a brand new, newly appointed Technomancer, part of a secret order who work to preserve what old technology they can, re-establish contact with Earth, and generally try and preserve the human race as much as they can. They can also throw lightning for reasons. Let me guess, they are not largely trusted, but are tolerated predominantly because their abilities are useful to the military. Pretty much. If I'm honest, the plot of this game is a bit predictable. There's one character who turns up fairly early on, for example, who might as well have been wearing a giant hat with "main villain" written on it in neon writing. But honestly, some of the characters are actually pretty good and pretty interesting, and those are predominantly your party members, which is good. If you're going to be spending a lot of the game with these people, they should be interesting. It's also worth noting that this game is quite padded in a lot of places, especially in Act 2. It took me about 12-13 hours to get to the end of Act 2, but then Act 3 and 4 went by very quickly, and I finished the game only about 4 hours after that. And as a result, it feels like you've got a lot of build-up, but not much after that. Too much setup and not enough resolution? Exactly. This is particularly noticeable in Act 3. You spend a large chunk of Act 3 building up this alliance against the main villain. Everything building towards a head, because there's going to be this big council meeting to decide whether or not he should remain in charge of the society. And frankly, it reminded me an awful lot of the excellent Landsmeet sequence from Dragon Age Origins. Until you actually get to the council meeting, at which point you talk to your contact, who says he'll do everything you can, and then it just cuts to the villain sitting in a darkened room while voices vaguely yell at him, and it's revealed that the council meeting went in your favour and he was kicked out. This is just really unsatisfying. That seems like a fairly significant problem. Sadly it is. And it's a problem that Bound by Flame and Mars Warlogs had as well. The stuff that the game builds towards that I really wanted to see all happens off screen, and that's really frustrating. I wanted the big council session where we denounce him before everyone, prove to everyone that this guy is the villain, and just not getting it is really disappointing. The game also has an ending Tron 5000, and frankly those are always annoying. I do hope that people know what that term means. You think I should define it? Well, I would. But then again, I am far more professional than you are. Yeah, well, that's not particularly hard, is it? For the record, an ending Tron 5000 refers to the practice of placing a major choice, usually with about 3 or 4 options, right at the end of the game and then only giving you a brief overview in some sort of epilogue to actually tell you what happens as a result of that decision. They tend to be annoying whenever they turn up, and they're almost never actually satisfying. This game also has one other major issue, which is its backtracking. You're going to be going back and forth across the same maps an awful lot, which wouldn't be as much of a problem if not for the respawning enemies I mentioned earlier, and the fact that the loading times are ridiculous. Are you actually going to give us a number, or should I just take some sort of wild guess? Well, for one quest I had to cross loading screens 8, maybe 9 times, and those loading screens take a full minute each. It's kind of ridiculous, especially when you're going back and forth all the time to various places, and it has to load every single time. I actually have no idea how many times I cross those loading screens. If somebody with way too much time on their hands wants to go and watch the full Let's Play and actually count them, feel free. But I would be willing to bet that it's probably well north of an hour spent on loading screens alone. Is the real issue there the loading screens, or is it the backtracking? It's both. Or, to be more accurate, it's a combination of the two. I wouldn't mind the backtracking so much if the loading screens were shorter, and I wouldn't mind the long load times if I didn't have to backtrack over the loading screens all the time. But the combination of the two is really kind of annoying at times. It's also worth noting that Spiders still haven't quite got the hang of including romance in their games. It's better than Bound by Flame, certainly, but not by much. They're still tacking the romance on pretty much right at the end of a companion's regular personal quest. So, only a token romance then? Oh, very much so, but to be fair, there is at least a little bit more inclusion this time. You've actually got 3 romance options, 2 female and 1 male. And while it would have also been nice to have a female player character, I do completely get why they didn't, given the sheer amount of extra vocal work that would have required, given that Zachariah has an awful lot to say throughout this game. Overall, I think I can say that the story of the Technomancer is definitely superior to the one in Mars Warlogs. It's probably superior to the one in Bound by Flame, but they've still got a ways to go before they really crack the whole thing. They're getting closer, don't get me wrong, but as with the gameplay, they're just not quite there yet. The graphics of this game are actually pretty good. Their facial animation in particular has got a hell of a lot better since Bound by Flame, and lip sync now actually syncs lips up to what are being said, which is always nice to see. It's worth noting as well that a lot of the lightning effects are pretty good, especially when they're arcing around your weapons. And frankly, I think I'm comfortable saying that this is easily the best looking game Spiders have ever made. It's also got a surprisingly stable frame rate. It tends to dip a little just after a loading screen, but it doesn't take long to get back up to 60, and it tends to stay there throughout, no matter how hectic things get on screen, which is always nice to see. Overall, I'm pretty happy to say that the graphics department at Spiders has actually done a really good job on this game. The art style of this game is alright. There's not really a lot to it that I genuinely like. There's a couple of nice creature designs, but a lot of it just doesn't do it for me. I think that's probably a result of the setting, though. It's hard to create really cool and interesting looking weapons when everything's meant to be cobbled together from scrap. So even the top tier stuff basically looks like a pipe with some spikes on it, which doesn't feel terribly heroic. That's definitely a result of the setting, and don't get me wrong, the Technomancers do have some fairly cool looking armour, but overall I think the art is very much a mixed bag, and I do think that's a fault of the setting rather than the art team themselves. The audio is not bad, but it's also not brilliant either. A lot of the voice acting is actually pretty good, and the main character in particular is fairly well acted, but also a lot of it falls flat, especially for a lot of the minor characters. The music, likewise, is perfectly functional, but no part of it ever really wowed me. There was no moment where I sat back and just went, oh wow, I'm liking this track. The same goes for the sound effects as well. They're actually pretty good sound effects for the most part, but there were none that I really sat back and thought, oh wow, that was a great sound effect, which, for the record, does happen to me occasionally. Overall, the audio is solid and decent, but nothing really more than that. So, did I enjoy the Technomancer? In spite of its issues, yes, honestly I did. Should you buy it? The Technomancer is another one of Spider's games. It's a promising RPG with a lot of very good elements and a lot of flaws. It's definitely superior to Bound by Flame, and this is true of every time Spiders makes an RPG. It's a little bit better than their last one. So if you enjoyed their previous work, you'll probably enjoy this one as well. But I still don't think they've quite tipped over the edge into a must-buy game. They're definitely getting closer, and they are definitely learning from what works and what doesn't, but they haven't quite made it yet. The Technomancer is definitely worth picking up if you can get it either after a price reduction or if you can snag it in a sale. But I'm not 100% convinced I can recommend it at half price. That will depend very much on your willingness to accept flaws. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I'm going to have to go watch the film that fairly obviously inspired the look and feel of this world. I will see you later. Martin, break out the best Arnie voice and get your ass to Mars. You are aware that impression was terrible. Yes. Yes, I am.